Hi, welcome to the webinar today, Modern Tax Research Tools, Techniques and Best Practices. My name is Matt Wilkinson. I am the head of go-to-market for Law Cyborg. Joining me are Natalie Lennon of Two Sides Accounting. Hey, Natalie. And
Hello.
Oscar from Law Cyborg. We'll
Hello.
do proper introductions shortly. Just before we get kicked off, let's do a bit of housekeeping. You're probably more familiar with tools like Zoom than Teams webinars, but pretty similar layout. We've got a chat and a Q&A. We really want to make this an interactive webinar, so please use, we don't mind what, either of those to send us a question. We're going to actually do some tax research on this session a little bit later. So use either of those. Maybe we can test them out now. Let me know where you're dialing in from. Oscar and I are in Auckland. Natalie is in Sydney. We've got a good mix of people, so it'd be cool to know where you're dialing in from. So you can use that chat button in the top left of your screen.
There we go.
Hello, Larissa we've got a couple of New Zealand people, Rotorua, Cambridge, Bianca's in Perth, very good. Cody's in Auckland. Awesome. So I think everyone's got the hang of that chat button, and there's also the Q&A window in there as well. So yeah, feel free to use those. Hey, Robert in Golden Bay, lovely place. Right. So what we're going to be talking about today is, if we move on to the agenda, Oscar, I'll just
Pull up the
get
slides.
those slides pulled up. We're going to be talking about the old way to do tax research, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with, and the new way. And that's really been enabled by AI. And that's enabled us to do some really amazing things around research. So we're going to be looking at that. Natalie is going to share her story of doing that modern way of tax research, which reduced a really complex tax question that she had for a client from something that would have taken probably over a day with some write-offs to something that could be done profitably within 3 hours. We're going to give you a live demo of a modern research workflow, and then we'll have plenty of time for your questions. And on that piece, I would love to know who has got a really complex tax question. Save that up for us, or send it in through the Q&A, and we'll put that into the tool later on. So obviously anonymized, but it'd be great to hear some of those questions from you, and we can put a modern tax workflow to the test with some of your real questions. And then at the end, we'll have a bit of a Q&A. So anything beyond that, we'll stick around for a Q&A. So we're going to pack a lot into a nice short session to introduce our presenters today. So Oscar has been with Law Cyborg for a long period of time, since close to the start, and he is an expert on all things tax research. So he's going to show you around that whole workflow. And Natalie is kindly joined us. You're involved in lots of things, Natalie. So there's Two Sides Accounting,
Lots, yeah.
Academy, and recently a podcast as well. So thanks for joining us today. I'm going to hand over to you now, Oscar, to tell everyone a little bit about Law Cyborg, to set the scene and present the webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. So I'm just going to be covering off a little bit about just what does the stage look like for tax research tools using AI, and how do those compare to traditional tools? But then I'm going to be trying to get through this quite quickly so that we can actually see what this looks like in practice from Natalie's perspective, using her really, really relevant example of that query that she used AI for in a more modern workflow. So a little bit about Law Cyborg, just very quickly. We were founded in 2023, so we're still relatively new, and we are founded basically because our founder was sick of having to use legacy research tools at EY and reckoned he could make something better. We've now got about 1,300 firms in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK using us, all the way from some of the big four to just small boutique solo practices and everything in between. So what is this old way to do tax research, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and so that you all know that I'm not just making stuff up as I go. Basically, what this looks like fundamentally is having to guess keywords. This is the core underlying problem with traditional research tools. And it's only a problem because there's a new way of doing things that we'll go into later. But to be clear, it does work. It's just a bit painful. And why is it a bit painful? Because you have to be guessing these specific words that are in the sources you need to read to find them in the first place. So it's a little bit circular because you need to already know a bit about what you're looking for to actually find it. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're having to guess keywords on the IRD website, ATO's website, or even just good old fashioned Google, especially before the time of AI overviews that show an AI take on an answer before showing you the actual websites. You have to guess all these keywords and you have to stitch together the information across a bunch of different sources, often different types of sources as well, and understand the common thread between them that actually answers your specific issue that you're trying to deal with. And that's quite a manual process because you're stitching it together, you're guessing the keywords. So what does this mean in terms of legacy research platforms? Now, fundamentally, legacy research platforms also use that same keyword system. So they are able to offer more in the way of one standardized library that gives you access to all the different types of sources that you need. So you're not having to jump between, say, the ATO website and then Google to find some extra additional content, and then also maybe jump over to the IRD to see how New Zealand treats that issue or vice versa. So you do have everything in one place, but still the same fundamental problem of having to guess keywords remains. And there are things like expert commentary that are offered by these legacy research platforms, which help in terms of giving you a little bit more specificity about how your issue should be treated, because you can find write-ups on how the specific tax issue that you're looking at for your client tends to be treated in a broad sense, and then you have to reapply that understanding to your specific set of facts. But the big difference that a tool like Law Cyborg actually allows for when it comes to research is not just doing retrieval, so not just finding the right sources for you to use, but also helping you do that reasoning. So making it easier to apply the information in those right sources to your specific set of facts. And that's what we're going to be going into in a bit more depth during this webinar today. So firstly, let's just set the scene about how does this compare to general AI tools? Because the elephant in the room, of course, is, but I can just go up on chatgpt.com and I can say, please answer this tax question for me. So what is the difference there? Why is something like Law Cyborg actually offering a little bit more than that? And it's a very valid question. And the other thing is, underpinning all of this, with AI tools, it is important to test them and compare them, because otherwise it's really hard to know what the difference is. But here is our take on why using general purpose AI like Copilot, Claude, ChatGPT, while it can be useful, isn't always as helpful as you'd like when it comes to doing tax research. So the first thing is that these tools are built to be general, which is incredible because I can ask it a question about anything from why did the Roman Empire fall to what should I make for the potluck this weekend. But if I'm asking about something quite niche and technical like tax, it's not built to be answering very specific questions in that field. And so often what it's going to be doing is using the internet to try and find that information for us. Problem is that these tools don't always know what a good source online looks like. So, you'll be asking it a tax question, it will be pulling up all these different blog posts from PwC, etc. No hate to PwC, of course, but sometimes you just want to know, how is the law actually written? What are the actual primary sources I need to read myself? And it's hard to make sure that it's found everything you need, because fundamentally, when it searches the internet, it's still having to guess keywords. That's what these general AI tools are doing. They're guessing keywords when they do web search, reading the web results, and then putting that into an answer for you. So that means that it's also a bit harder to give it all of the context it needs about how to answer a tax question for you, in terms of all your context about how you want it to write an answer, where it should be looking for sources, how it should interpret that information it comes across, because it's built to be general by design. So none of that specific knowledge about how to do tax research is baked into these tools. Now, this is not to say that those general tools are not useful. Often what I hear from people is that they're quite useful for sort of starting to narrow down where to start looking for a particular research issue, and that they can still save time if you're just trying to quickly double check that something might still be the case, if it can easily find that answer using the internet. The problem is that you can build up a lot of hidden costs when you're doing quite technical research that can leave you having to spend way longer than if you just sucked it up and used something like Google in the first place. And that's because you're having to spend quite a lot of extra time verifying a lot of the output that you're getting, because it can be pretty hard to know exactly what material it's looked at and put into an answer for you. And you have this nagging feeling that you might have missed something. Maybe it just didn't look at all of the right sources. Maybe it didn't search all of the right keywords before searching the internet for you. And that is what's the real killer, because if you're having to start a research process and you don't know how long it will take to get to an answer that you can actually use, and before you know it, you've spent a few hours longer than you intended, that's when it really doesn't start to feel worth it. So where does something like Law Cyborg come in? Why is AI actually useful for text research? Because I'm sure that you're all sick to death of seeing AI being crammed into basically everything under the sun as a marketing gimmick. I am too, and I work at an AI company. But why is Law Cyborg actually suited for this purpose? So the first thing is that you aren't having to work using keywords anymore. Rather than just having to take your super complex situation and turn it into a few ultra specific words, you can instead ask more fully formed questions. So you can ask questions like you'd ask a senior colleague. So you can give it full sentences, full context. You can ask follow-ups, and any context that you give Law Cyborg, rather than confuse just giving it too many facts and it forgets, the more you give it, the more specific the answers you get will be. So it's able to really take in so much context about your actual dates involved and the actual client sort of actions that they took and what they're wanting from this outcome if possible. Anything like that will just help Law Cyborg help you. And you also don't have to worry about guessing the magic search term. So no one wants to be doing the keyword guessing game of just enumerating through guessing a bunch of different random words, reading what comes back, quickly going to the next page on the search results, making sure that it all works, or doing that same guessing game from an answer from ChatGPT and going, okay, how much of this comes from a source that I can easily connect this to, and how much of this do I just have to sort of trust and hope for the best? So you can ask questions in natural language. That's a lot nicer. Now, Law Cyborg is built only to answer tax questions and other law questions. However, we are focused solely on tax in terms of this webinar. That's also where a lot of our team's expertise lies. So that's where Law Cyborg's real power is in answering tax questions. And the reason for that is that it's really good at two key things. It's really good at finding the exact sources it needs to read to answer your specific question, not by using keywords, but by using the meaning of the question that you've asked. And secondly, it's really good at actually, from those really, really ultra relevant sources that it finds for you, then using those to reason over your set of facts, your specific issue that you're asking a question about. So rather than just writing you a general answer for here is how this issue tends to be treated, Law Cyborg will be able to answer your specific question. The answer will come back to your sets of facts that you've given it, to anything that you have asked it to pay attention to in its answer, and it will always be very clearly answering your question while still linking to those underlying authoritative sources. So you can think of it sort of like two specialists working together in Law Cyborg. Half of it is the specialist that finds the exact pieces of the exact sources it needs to use, and then the other part is the part that actually applies reasoning to your set of facts using those sources to write you a really specific, well-grounded answer. Now, it's also built to only answer tax questions when you're using tax and Law Cyborg as a practice area. But what does that actually mean? Basically, it means a couple different things. Firstly, it only has access to the right documents already. It doesn't just have to find them online using web search. It uses our own database that has millions of tax related research documents that it would need to have access to be able to give you useful answers. So everything from actual legislation to commentary from IR or ATO to interpretation statements or even like Hansard. It has a lot of this different material so that it already has access to everything it needs without having to just go search for it online and hope for the best. And crucially, Law Cyborg will very clearly reference the sources it uses in the answers it provides back. So you'll always be able to trace an answer back to the original parts of the sources it was using. And that's crucial because you don't want to just have to trust an AI and hope for the best, because you want to be able to know, okay, I just want to be able to get to an answer that I'm confident in, that I know is correct, faster. And that's what Law Cyborg helps you do by actually linking you to the exact parts of the sources it's used to give you any answer that you see. And the other crucial thing here is that it's not just finding the right answer already written in the source for you. Law Cyborg is actually writing custom commentary for your specific situation. It's taking your specific set of facts, finding the relevant sources that actually it needs to apply to that set of facts, and then doing that reasoning, applying that for you and walking through that process in an answer to you. So what that means is that, it actually gets it in a way that something like ChatGPT just doesn't, because that mental model of how to do tax research is embedded really deep in how the product is built. And hopefully we'll hear an example of what that looks like from Natalie shortly. And what this means fundamentally is that you're able to get speed. So you're able to really cut down on the length of time needed to do comprehensive research without sacrificing rigor. So without just getting lower quality answers and just churning them out, because, I'm sure you've all seen the sort of marketing around AI when it's like, oh, great, a task that used to take you a month now takes 2 seconds, where I ask one quick question and then ChatGPT just does everything for me. That's not what we're about here at Law Cyborg. We're about still making it comprehensive for research. So you're still able to be really comprehensive, cover a lot of ground just faster. But we do not want to compromise on the level of research that you're doing. We want to make it even more rigorous. And the only way that we can do that is by letting you do it way, way, way quicker, by not having to waste time looking at irrelevant sources, not having to waste time guessing keywords. Instead, you're only reading what's actually relevant and useful, and then able to ask it natural language questions to take that output and do something with it to actually solve the task that you're needing to do that research for in the first place. So now I will pass it over to Natalie, who's going to walk us through an actual example from an actual situation that she dealt with where she used Law Cyborg to do that research.
Thanks, Oscar. It's very interesting because before I'm going to share this story, I just want to go back a little bit. And I had a few other accountants telling me how good Law Cyborg was, and I was like, I don't need it. I've got Chat, I've got Claude. I don't really get that many questions from clients. I'm good. And then I was at the Accounting and Business Expo, and while I was at the expo, I actually got an email from a client, and I just pulled it up here. It's basically like, it's an essay, and basically the email was, "Hi Natalie, we need advice on the tax, the FBT and GST implications of a proposed 12-month secondment of an employee from Adelaide to Perth, the best way to structure it to minimise tax for both employee and the business. Please set out the implications for the employee, the business, and recommend the most tax effective and practical structure." And it goes on. Now, that email would have usually sent me into a bit of a spin, and it did, because I was like, wow, that's like, it's a very detailed piece of advice that they want. And so my mind is going, okay, how do I charge for this? I haven't looked at these kinds of rules for a while, so it's going to take me a long, long time. And then I walked past the Law Cyborg stand, and I thought, the universe is telling me something here. So I went over and I, spoke to them, and they showed me the product, and they said CA ANZ members get 1 month free. So I thought, perfect, I'm going to sign up and I'm going to put this advice in there. And what I did was I pasted the email in, and I said, I've received this email from my client. I need to go back to them with an advice document. Can you help me? So you don't need to be a prompt wizard to use this. Put it in there, and it spat me out a 11-page document. And obviously I had to spend time cross-checking and making sure it was all correct, but it did a fantastic job. It gave me all the references to where I needed to go to, cross-check that everything was correct. Then I could export it out, convert it to PDF, and email it off to a client. Now, depending on what size firm you've got, you might usually have a junior do the grunt work for this. It probably would have taken them a whole week to research it. I guess it's a good learning exercise. Then it comes to you. Then you have to verify and go through it anyway. I don't have a large team. I've only got quite a small team, and so I don't have juniors. And so for me, I use these AI apps as if they're my junior. They do the grunt work for me, and then I do the cross-checking. But like, the client was very impressed. I was able to turn it around within a couple of days, where usually that would probably take me a whole week to do a little bit, do a bit more research, sit on it, think about it, check if I've missed something, because as we know, the tax laws in Australia, and probably the same in New Zealand, are quite complicated. And even when you're doing your own research, you might miss one little thing because it's not worded a certain way. And so, yeah, I was able to look like a superstar. There was no write-offs. I think the only question next time is, how much are we going to charge ongoing? and making sure that we're charging at the right price point to actually make some money. Because if this AI is going to get better and better, whilst we've still got to do our checks and balances, more than cut the time in. Well, I was going to say half, but way more than that. So in the end, I think it was about maybe 3 hours in total. Would have taken a whole week. And now we're using it for even just those quick questions. So I had a client email the other day, just a basic question about deductibility of something in their tax return. Now, usually that's something pretty basic. I know the answer. I could quickly write a response, right? But we are required by the Tax Agent Services Act to actually quantify any responses we give to clients these days. So it was good to just put that question in to Law Cyber, gave me the answer with the references, and it does it in the format you want. So it's like, I've received this email from a client. Can you draft this response? Copy, paste, check that it's all good, send it off. So I'm a converted accountant. I went from thinking I don't need AI to help me, I'm pretty smart, I've got a big brain, to this is amazing. It's helping me reduce my time on the tax research that, let's be real, no one really enjoys. Let me know if you enjoy doing tax research in the chat. But I sure as hell don't. I enjoy when it's done and I feel really smart that I've prepared this really good document. But most of the time the client, doesn't see the value in it either. Like this one, they saw the value in it, but I wouldn't have been able to, there would have been write-offs for sure, And I think the way we price it as well, sometimes if we're doing the research, if it's something that we're not doing all the time, we feel we can't really charge the client for some of that, because some of it's kind of relearning the topic at the same time. What about the security of data in Cyborg? So I didn't put any client names in there, but I guess Oscar can speak to that.
Yeah, so just really quickly, we're really locked down when it comes to privacy and security. We have to be, right? Because this is a professional tool that people are going to be asking questions about client situations. And so what that means in terms of how we've handled data is everything is encrypted fully at rest and in transit. So no one on our team can even see the questions or answers anyone is asking. And essentially, we've also got the sort of big 3 security certifications for companies like ours to actually prove that we're following all the processes that we're saying we are. So SOC 2 Type 1, SOC 2 Type 2, and ISO 42001 and 27001. If anyone has any specific questions about security, more than happy for them to just either be chucked in the chat and we can cover them off at the end, or people are more than welcome to just flick me an email at oscar@lawcyborg.com. And I'll also just in the chat as well quickly drop a link to Law Cyborg's Trust Center, where you can also request access to actually viewing all of those organizational policies and procedures we have in place, as well as being able to read the reports of the certifications that we were actually provided. So that is just trust.lawcyborg.com.
Great. Is there any more questions? Anyone else in the chat who's got any other use cases, any other, any other things rolling around in their brains of ways they could possibly use it? Because as I said before, before I implemented it, I thought I didn't need it. And now that I've got it, it's one of those things that I think once you start using it, you'll see more of the use cases. And it's like all of the AI stuff. Like there's so much coming every single day. There's an update to Claude, for example. And I'm loving it, but it can be quite overwhelming. Security. No.
I will also be screen sharing shortly as well, and actually showing examples of Law Cyborg answering questions and what that new research workflow can look like in terms of how you can use it. So if anyone has any really tough questions that they think might give Law Cyborg a good run for its money, you're more than welcome to just chuck them in the Q&A or the chat, whatever's easiest, and we can actually put that to the test. So don't just take our word for it here.
Here we got a question. How often does Law Cyborg get it wrong? I haven't had it get anything wrong. But we've still got to check it because we're the ones with the tax license, not the apps. But yeah, definitely, I haven't seen it go wrong so far.
Law Cyborg can get things wrong. However, when it gets things wrong, it tends to be because it's just misinterpreted quite poorly written law. So it's a lot more of an honest way of getting things wrong. Now, what do I mean when I say honest? I'm sure all of you have heard of the concept of hallucination, of basically just AI tools making things up that sound feasible, but are not grounded in fact whatsoever. So Law Cyborg doesn't really have the capacity to just hallucinate in the same way as something like ChatGPT, because we don't actually trust the AI to find the sources it uses for an answer. Instead, our database, which is only got access to the actual tax documents that we've put in there ourselves, serves the AI all of the exact sources it needs to rely on to write an answer, and the AI can only use those sources. So when it gets something wrong, it tends to be because there was something written in a way where it could be interpreted differently, and the AI just made the human-like error of misinterpreting how it was written. A good example that I can remember, because it doesn't happen that often, so it does stick in my mind when Law Cyborg does get something wrong, is when there was updates to New Zealand's Brightline rules about a year and a half ago, and soon after these updates came out, there was this new retroactive rule that was brought in, and Law Cyborg was answering questions incorrectly about that new rule and whether or not it applied retroactively. The only way that we were able to find this out, by the way, was because of people reporting answers, which is the only way anyone on our team is able to see any examples of Law Cyborg answering questions or the questions people are asking it. And what we found is that we got a few of these reports and we looked into it. It was reading everything that it needed to. It was looking at all the right sources, but there was some stacking double negatives and some bill commentary that it was pulling on. So it was saying something like, so this rule does not apply retroactively. And Law Cyborg just misunderstood the stacking double negatives like a human would, where it was like, I could see how it could make that mistake. But the nice thing is that because it cites everything clearly, as we'll see shortly, you can always spot those errors when they pop up, and they do pop up quite rarely. But when they do, you can spot them super simply because you can just click on all the citations, be taken to the exact parts of the sources it uses. So checking exactly what it was using and how it applied it to the answer is a really, really quick step. And that's a really crucial part of our platform because we don't want people to just trust the AI and call it a day. We know that people want to understand exactly the output that they're actually using to create a client deliverable or to actually solve this person's problem. And to do that, you need to understand exactly why you've been given a certain answer.
Thanks for all the questions coming in. I'm just going to jump in for a second. Hopefully, we're going to get through all of these on the session. If we don't, we will follow up with an email. Really appreciate all those questions. What we're going to do now is Oscar is going to share his screen and just show you it because I think some of these things show rather than tell is going to be a lot easier than us trying to discuss them in the chat or just on screen. So we'll do that and then we'll stick around for some Q&A afterwards. But like I say, keep the questions coming in. And if we can't get through them in the session, we're not hiding from them. We're happy to answer those by email afterwards.
Okay, so I've brought Law Cyborg up on screen here now. Are there any questions that you think we can use as a starting point to put through here, Matt?
I haven't had one come in that I can see, but we did have a couple earlier that came in. If anyone's got a really tricky tax question, anonymized, obviously, throw it over to us and we'll put it in. But maybe we seed it with that question that we had, which was across a couple of jurisdictions, because I know we've got people from Australia and New Zealand on the call. Maybe we could do one of those. And then anyone else has got a question, we're happy to throw that in. Use either the chat or the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we use the example of a question that you actually had pop up for you, Matt?
I'm more than happy to do that. I can give the background to that situation, which was I was potentially going to sell my business, my old business, to an Australian company. It would have been a holding company from which I would have been paid dividends. And there was the structuring of that company was heavily, the remuneration was heavily going to be in dividends. So I was very interested in how I would be taxed on those Australian dividends. I asked my accountant at the time and didn't get a satisfactory answer. Very good on New Zealand tax. We're very unclear on the Australian side of things. And I actually had to go to somebody else. I had to use a different accountant to get the answer I wanted. When I joined Law Cyborg, this was the first thing that I put into the tool and got a really good answer. But let's use that as the example. So yeah, my question was, as a New Zealand tax resident, and I'm getting paid dividends by an Australian company, will I be taxed twice? And the answer I found was yes, but it took me a lot of searching around some of those old way kind of workflows that you were talking about. I was Googling, I was finding these blogs from big four accounting firms, but I wasn't sure if they were at the right point in time. And I was just left with this horrible feeling of uncertainty. I did manage to get a good answer, but this would have saved a lot of time.
So whenever we see a citation like this in the answer, if I hover over that, that's just giving me a summary of what this source is that it was using. And then if I click on it, it'll open up either in this little side view here or in a new tab, depending on the source. It'll open up the actual part of the source that it was relying on to give us that part of the answer. So some of these documents that it will link you to, they can be hundreds of pages long, but it will always start you off on the part that it was actually using to give us that part of the answer. So it doesn't matter what type of source it is either, you'll be able to see what it's used. So we can see here it's used a mix of sources, which often is required to get a really nice comprehensive answer. You need to look at a whole bunch of different types of sources and work out the common threads between them for how they actually give you clarity on your specific set of facts. So Law Cyborg is also able to do that. It knows what sort of sources are important for what sort of question. We can see here, if I click on a legislative reference, that will take me to that section, whether or not it's Australian or New Zealand legislation. And I'm always able to go through and work out exactly why I'm getting this answer as a result, because I can see not only every source it's used, but where it's used each source. So we can see here, it's used this source 11 here multiple times in the answer. It's used it to give us this little part of the answer here, but then also a little bit further down, it's also used it here. So I can always go through and see, okay, every single thing it was relying on. And I also get an estimated certainty score. That's what I'm hovering my mouse over now. What that tells you is essentially how directly Law Cyborg found the exact answer to your question in the sources that it read. So when a certainty score is low, that doesn't even necessarily mean it's incorrect. It might just mean that Law Cyborg has had to really go outside of the sources that it was relying on to give you the answer you wanted. So for example, and this is also going to be an example of how you can use a research tool like Law Cyborg a little bit differently to legacy tools. Let's say I've got this answer here and I'm like, okay, great. I've gone through, checked those references, everything looks kosher. This is what I need, but I'm not going to send this to a client. They're not going to want to read this wall of text. And I want to make it a little bit faster to actually start getting an email draft going so that I have something I can send them that's actually a bit more sensitive to what the client needs to read at the end of the day and doesn't include anything that isn't relevant for them. So if I then say, okay, please draft an email to my client that was being faced with this issue, keep it concise and friendly. Don't use any technical language as they are a tax layperson. I'd expect that an answer like this is going to be naturally a lower certainty score. Why is that? That's because no source in Law Cyborg's database is going to tell it, here is how to write an email to the client that's nice and concise and friendly, doesn't include any technical tax language. That doesn't mean Law Cyborg won't be able to do it. It just means that Law Cyborg will have to make some of its own decisions about, okay, how should I structure this answer as an email? What language should I use? How do I take the information in these underlying sources that I've found and turn this into the answer that I specifically wanted from this question? And so we can see this is a lot lower certainty because it's done a lot of that thinking itself in terms of turning it into an email, and also because it doesn't include references. Since I'm asking it to actually draft me something, by default, it won't include those same references for me. That doesn't mean it hasn't used those sources. I can still see every single thing it used at the bottom there. But if I wanted to see exactly what it used, I could edit this question or ask a follow-up and ask it to include those references. It just doesn't by default if I'm drafting something. Now, I did also see a question in the chat before about how often is Law Cyborg's database updated? It's updated weekly. And what's in Law Cyborg's database? Well, thankfully, you can actually see all of the categories of sources in there. So if I open up this panel on the left-hand side, and then I click library, and then I expand these drop-downs, what I'm seeing here is basically the library that Law Cyborg is locked in. I am seeing all of the different sources that Law Cyborg has access to before it answers questions. I'm in the New Zealand tax research tool at the moment, but that same ability to view the library also applies if I switch to one of these Australian ones as well. So if I then open up that library again, I can see all of the types of documents that Law Cyborg can use. And the reason why I've got these ticks is because I can also stop Law Cyborg from even being able to read particular sources. So let's say I'm wanting an answer where I only want Law Cyborg to link me to all of the relevant parts of legislation so that I can read that myself. All I'd need to do is go, okay, if I start a new query here, then I open up this library, and then I untick everything. And then I just tick legislation, or I could even be more specific if I wanted. I could even tick specific source types under that. But if I only have legislation ticked and I say, please provide a detailed summary of the most important legislative references for understanding FBT ranked by importance with justification for each and a small example of how each legislative provision works in practice. So obviously, a question like this, Law Cyborg, it really needs access to all of those underlying sources. And that's really what we're focused on, is making sure that Law Cyborg has everything it needs to answer tax questions that are specific, that are technical, in which you do not want to be wrong. So we can see here, Law Cyborg will be able to look through only legislation because that's all I've given it access to, and it will be able to just give me a list of things to click on myself. So even if you're someone that doesn't want AI to just do everything for you and you just don't want to, you want to actually read every single underlying source yourself to come to your own conclusion, Law Cyborg can also save you a lot of time as well, because you don't have to be doing all of that Googling or keyword guessing on the IRD or ATO website. You can just have all of the right underlying sources pulled up, everything organized in nice little tabs, and you know that you're looking at everything you need to, even if you're not wanting Law Cyborg to actually write you an answer and you just want to read everything that would contain the information you need. So it is very flexible in that way. And this is one of the real benefits of AI, is that I can ask questions like this and know that Law Cyborg will get what I mean. I don't have to translate everything into keywords. So that means that there's a wide variety of things that people use our tool for that we'd never planned for or considered. I've talked to people that use this tool to do things like create lunch and learn sessions for their colleagues about how to, understand a particular new issue or anything in between. So it is very flexible, which means that, there is a lot of breadth in terms of how you can use it. So it's pretty easy to experiment with, ask it how to do something or whether or not it can answer a question in a certain way. And then often you might be quite surprised that, yeah, it really can. If you just give it instructions, it's pretty good at following them. Yep.
Just on that point, Oscar, we conscious of time and keen to get a few more questions in before we come up to the end. Lyle asks, can Law Cyborg be used to review tax returns?
So Law Cyborg is really excellent at reviewing work generally, because sometimes you just want to have a quick second opinion and you don't want to have to, or you don't have the ability, if you're a solo practitioner, to actually ask somebody on the desk beside you, hey, can you have a quick read over this? Let me know what you think. Law Cyborg is fantastic for that purpose. However, for something like a tax return, it depends how that information is structured. One annoyance right now with Law Cyborg is that it can't yet understand Excel spreadsheets. It can understand PDFs. So some people have been just exporting the sheets in Excel to a PDF format, and then Law Cyborg can understand it that way. That is a little bit of an annoying extra step. That is something our team is working on. However, Law Cyborg is fantastic at reviewing things. So if you have something that you've already written, especially if it's in a topic area that you just haven't checked in a few months, and you want to make sure that, hey, I'm pretty sure I know how this issue is treated. I just want to make sure nothing's changed in the last few months that I'm not aware of, because of course, accountants are expected to keep up to date with the gazillion changes that are happening to every little piece of the tax landscape day to day. Law Cyborg is fantastic for bringing things up to date in that way, doing a quick check or pass over things, and also using as a sort of sparring partner. So if you want to test an approach against, look, please review this, find potential holes in it, Law Cyborg's great for that too. That's one of the nice things about being able to use it conversationally, is that you can also use it to review, not just to prepare new work for you.
Okay, great. We've got a few more questions, but we're coming up to time, so I'm keen not to go over and give everyone their day back. But we will follow up with those questions individually. If you may just put the slides back on, and if anyone wants to see a personal demo of Law Cyborg, I will put that link in the chat, and there's also a QR code. We'll send it out afterwards in an email, so if you don't grab it now, that's fine. Let's put that in there. So you can book a session with Oscar or one of the team. They can give you a personal demo of Law Cyborg. But I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming along today. Thank you, Natalie, for making the time to come along too. Really appreciate you sharing that. It's really useful to hear these things from a practitioner and not from some marketing and sales guys like us. But yeah, look, there's a heap of questions there. We really appreciate the interaction. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. We will answer them afterwards. But enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for making the time. We'll send the recording out along with an email. And yeah, that will have links to book a chat if you want to dive into Law Cyborg a little bit more. But yeah, thanks very much for everyone for coming along. Enjoy the rest of your day.